All right, today we're going to talk about how to make $1 million this year. This started out as a how to focus conversation with some of my business builders, and what I turned it into was, I think, something a bit more productive. And so at the top of the list, you can see is trend. And that's something that I understand intimately from trading the markets. People talk about trends, but those two are totally different things. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk about growth versus scale, and then we're going to go right into what's hopefully a really detailed outline for you so that you can properly understand what this really means. Right. So the way I divide up growth is in two ways. You have growth and then you have scaling. Scaling to me is where it's being done to you. That's where you've jumped on a trend. People want what you have. There are a lot of them. And so cash is just flowing into your company. It's like things are, quote, easy. In the trading world, this would happen where you get into a trade and it's like from the very first moment, you've got profits and it doesn't really draw down on you, right? There's none of that emotional pressure. That's scaling. Growth, on the other hand, is where you're digging in, right? It's constant work, and it's a constant effort. This would be where, you put a position on in the market and it's like you make a little bit of money, but then you're a little bit down, a little bit of money, a little bit down, like that. And so really in growth, your profit margins are usually pretty thin because the costs to go get leads, nurture those leads, turn them into sales, and then get those sales to generate more revenue, like that process is relatively expensive. Whereas in scaling, like there's so much money coming in, you can charge much higher prices. You got much more price elasticity. You wind up not necessarily having those issues. Um, let's talk about what's going on from a fundamental level. This is called desire. Energy focused on a solution is what I'm equating to desire here. And then we can talk about, quote, macro trends, right? So these are bigger concepts or bigger issues that provide for the desire. These are tied into what people want, which is why you see the particular list I have here. Everything from this quiet quitting thing that's going on to making more money. All of these things house trends. It's the meta conversation around the trend. The keto diet, carnivore diet are in the meta or macro conversation of lose weight. Hopefully that's clear. Ultimately, though, people don't really care if it's keto, if it's carnivore, if it's veganism. They want to lose weight. And then more specifically, we can chunk it down. Like it may be an ultra personal thing. Like one thing that I heard recently was a woman's kid jumped in her lap and said, "Mommy, you feel squishy." That's a problem. It could be you feel like for me, it's when I've got enough fat that it hangs over my waistband, it's like, okay, I got to do something about that. Again, that's personal motivation. This is going to tie in later, but I'll deal with it now. Where everybody goes wrong is by equating a personal thing to everyone. Oh, everyone must feel this way. That's kind of a common fallacy anyway. Um, but it really applies with entrepreneurs, it seems. Okay, so let's take this stepwise. Your target is a business. So business X. That entrepreneur wants to make more money. Now, I just filled in a couple of examples. This is not a recommendation. We're just having a thought experiment here, but a thought experiment with some skin in the game. So if the business owner wants to make more money with crypto, right? So we start here, okay, we got a business, we want to make more money. It's with crypto. Well, that could be crypto trading, it could be NFT, it could be security, or more like the crypto pipeline. How do I develop a solution for real estate, right? So it's got to tie into the title, and I'm somehow verifying that that title, number one, is valid. Number two, it's owned by the person who really owns it. So that's kind of all lumped into security. And then, there are layers beneath each one of these because you can get into pipes, you can get into front facing stuff. Again, we don't need to get too far into the weeds, but now we're starting to get into how am I going to make $1 million this year? What do I need to focus on? Well, then you have to ask, well, what is the business? So this relates to business X. Well, if it's trading, their business really is being a middleman. If it's NFT, that's really being an artist or an art dealer, if you're going to chunk it up. Typically, in the business end of it would be art dealer. And then security, it's really a service provider. Now, yeah, you could get in some hardware there, but generally you find most of these companies have an element of service because they learned from IBM. Like IBM's big mistake was they were a hardware company. They realized that's quickly commoditized. So they reinvented themselves as a service business that kind of gave the hardware away for free. Obviously, if you can tie those two things together, it's really hard to disconnect from you as well. All right, so now we're getting into more of the business end of this for you. Like if you're trying to figure out what do I focus on or how am I going to make $1 million, it's well, which part of that business owner's business are you going to focus on? Is it getting leads? Is it nurturing those leads? Is it the sales portion? Is it sales growth? And specifically, are you going to help that business owner get more customers at one time, get them more frequently, or keep them for longer? Or are you going to do combinations of all of this, or are you going to do all of this? Okay, now this is literally just the groundwork where we're thinking through what are some of the meta things that we're plugging into? Then conceptually, what are we doing as a business so that we know where to focus? We're honing our focus down. Now, I'll leave that conversation off because at that point, you really do have to jump into the weeds. That's more of a business conversation between you and your partners or between you and yourself. Now let's talk about how do we do this in a year, right? I don't know why, but everybody's like, how do I make $1 million this year? Okay, well, first of all, a year is 12 months, right? So you should really plan on most of your revenue coming in the last part of those 12 months, which roughly speaking is going to be the last 2 to 3 months. It could even be the last 30 days. If you really wanted to get into it, it's probably going to come in the last 2 weeks. Now we got to do some math. And I'll say this unequivocally and unhesitatingly, you shouldn't be in business if you can't do math. I mean, it's a given. All right. The first question though is, and nobody wants to answer this, it seems, are we talking 1 million in sales or are we talking 1 million in profit? Because I'm really not that impressed if you make $1 million in sales because you could be losing a ton of money, right? It's like the joke is, what's the fastest way to become a millionaire? Start with $10 million. All right. If it's profit, this is where things start to get interesting to me, and probably a little bit discouraging for you, especially if you don't know what you're doing. If your profit margins are 30%, for illustration's sake, let's say you've got better margins than these, but these will give us, I think, a more realistic and conservative way to start. At 30% margin, you have to sell $3,333,333 worth of stuff. At 20%, it's 5 million. At 12%, it's $8.3 million. Now, again, easy math in the sense that, we're not doing calculus here. Average sale to make a million. Obviously, if you're selling $100 product, 10,000 sales, all the way down here to 24,000, you've got to sell 41. Now we have to think about what's the difficulty of this sale, or another way to say it is, what kind of machinery do we need to put in place so that we can reliably sell 10,000 of a $100 item or 41 of a $24,000 item. What's also helpful, I think, is to think about, well, how's that money going to come in? So a harder sale would be if it's, sorry, we got to think about upfront or over time. All right, so going back up here, are we collecting the $24,000 now, or is it over a contract? Right, so this is where the whole contract value comes in. And this is where we get into all kinds of BS funny math where people talk about their revenue. What they're probably talking about is contract value, not booked revenue. This is why in the public environment, you have to disclose this stuff because people like to play games so that they sound better. I'm guilty of it as anybody else because look, nobody wants to hear about this stuff up here, right? The reason why you don't hear people talk about this is because the 80% of people who aren't going to do anything see this and they're like, holy crap, that sounds like work. Hey, let me go listen to somebody that's going to tell me this is going to be easy. This is not going to be easy. Okay. So if you're getting your money upfront over time, I get into this down here, we're going to have to start thinking about that. Okay. So keep that in mind. A harder sale is usually equated with a higher price. Now, I put harder in quotes because you're not going to walk up to somebody and say, hey, give me $24,000 and I will solve all of your sales problems, or I will solve all of your lead getting problem, or I'll solve all of your sales growth problem, right? They're not going to believe. Like as a business owner, when I see this stuff, I just don't believe it. That's a harder sale. High price is relative to the offer and more importantly, their pain. Now, this also ties all the way back up here to desire and trend. Right? So this is all one interlocking system here of business growth and what do I focus on? If you can get an offer, and I'll deal with this down here. If you can get to an offer where you have somebody that has a relatively high pain and they have a high spending threshold, that's where you can start to get into the lower end of the spectrum here, where your dollar per sale is higher. Now, you don't want to guess at this. The mistake that you will make as an entrepreneur if you don't do this deliberately is assume because you've got a great idea that, oh, people must have a high pain point. Totally common in software, but very much common for entrepreneurs because we tend to be optimistic, and we tend to like be open to new experiences. Now, logistically, something for you to think about. If you have your money coming in over time, you had better be thinking about your account receivable, baby, because that will absolutely crush you. Like, I don't care if you sold all 41 of your $24,000 contracts today, like, whatever reason, you call people up and it's such a great offer and they've got so much pain. They're like, yes, I'm in. Yes, yes. Okay. You don't have all your money. Like, so yeah, you can go out there on Twitter and say, I just built an $8 million business in what, 2 weeks. But do you really have an $8 million business? You've got 41 contracts that are worth $24,000 over 12 months, i.e., accounts receivable. So you've got to think about this stuff from the beginning. How are you going to finance that? Are you going to go to somebody like Pipe? Are you going to go to a factor? Are you going to go to a bank? Do you have investors where you're like, hey, put some investment money in, but your investment money is going to be backstopping our AR? I don't know. That's up for you to decide. But if you don't think about it here, God forbid you actually make all those sales. You're going to make a really dumb decision. You're going to go grab some venture debt, something else that seems easy, and you're going to make a mistake, right? So now this $8 million business that you've created is going to implode. Okay. Part of this conversation you got to have is what suppliers do you have to pay? You paying your staff, your rent, utilities? Do you have a huge AWS bill? Are you sending thousands of emails to get this thing done? Do you have to buy people computers in your company? All of that needs to be thought through because remember, this started out as, well, what do I focus on, Maseo? Well, see, it depends. It depends on where in this process you are, and it depends on if you are into the process, which pieces of these have you forgotten about, and maybe what do you really need to focus on? Like if you've got an impending AR problem, maybe you should solve that before you go get a bunch more sales because your AR can crush you. Listen, I learned that unequivocally this year, which is probably why there's so much detail. All right, so money up front, obviously that's not as difficult of a problem, but you you still need to think about cash management, right? So if somebody gives you $24,000 up front, you can't go party like it's 1999. You've got to allocate the cash appropriately. This is where accrual accounting can come in, where you can actually literally put buckets and you can start allocating cash to it. I mean, seriously, put jars up and fake money where once a jar is full, you know, okay, now the utility bill is paid, the rent bill is paid. This will keep you out of so much trouble. Now, all of that is just groundwork. We can go into detail on that for like 90 years. Uh, 17 minutes. All right, this isn't bad. So Q1, like what are you going to do absolutely first? We don't even need to go into other steps until you've done this. You got to test offers. What is an offer? Well, I mean, my Facebook feed is full of offers. An offer, simply put, is something that you are telling to a person to describe either a product or a service so that they give you money and you give them what you just described. Right? That's the high level thinking of it. Then there are elements inside of that offer, right? When you're talking about creating the offer. The best way to test all of this is to ask people if they want it. Years ago, I was mentoring under arguably one of the greatest copywriters that's ever lived, and he would take his sales copy, he would take his offers, he would get in a hot pink Mercedes that someone else was driving, and they would pull up to a stoplight. If somebody came up and made a comment about this hot pink Mercedes he was in, he would briefly engage them in conversation and then say, "Hey, you know what? I've got this new idea that I'm testing out for my business. What do you think of this?" And he would read that. He would literally read them the copy. Unless the person said, "Hey, where do I get that?" He would throw it out. Okay, now, if you are lucky, and this is going to be about 2 to 3% of you, this will be a great offer. You'll have a large population and they will have high desire. That's where you get lucky. Now, I'm going to dig into this just very briefly because there's a dude that's like all over my YouTube feed, um, who's espousing the fact that he created this $100 million company, sold it for a lot of money. He got lucky. What does that mean? He had a great offer to a large population that had high desire. And most important piece, he had the skill set to capitalize on it. The other thing that's in the background here is that if you don't have the skill set, you are not going to grow. There's a baseline level of skill that you need to have. I touched on some of those skills above. They're very simple, they're learnable, but you have to have those. You are certainly not going to grow a company to $100 million without a very specific set of skills to do that. This would be the criteria for luck, right? So how do you create your own luck? You find a great offer, you find a large population that has high desire. Another way of saying that would be high pain. Okay, 98% of the time though, you're going to tweak. So at first, this is going to be growth, right? That's why I started off all the way back up here with growth versus scale. Okay. You are probably not going to get to $1 million in 12 months if you're growing. Why? Because it's a slog. You're like, oh my gosh, everything, you're constantly tweaking. Why? Because you've got a great offer, but it's a small population, right? So it's like money comes in bursts. And you feel really great for whatever, a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months. And it's like, man, what happened? Oh, our sales guy is on a slump. Is he? Or maybe did you have a great offer in a small population? Right. Then you get into bad offer and any size population, which is actually where most of you are going to be just because you don't know what you're doing or you had some crackpot idea. So it's a bad offer and then the rest doesn't matter. This is horrible. Average offer, any size population. Why? Because it's like just enough to keep you interested, but not enough to scale. So that's why I said 1 and 3 are the worst. So let me deal with number 3 since it's the worst. And then I'm going to end here because we're at about 22 minutes, or we're actually at 22 minutes. The way you test this, what? Is this an average offer? Very simply, raise the price. So average offer means you're getting some sales coming in. The way you test average is by raising price because people just don't pay a higher price for average. So it could be you went into the market with a reasonable price. People bought it. Once you raise it to unreasonable levels, they decide they don't want it. How to make $1 million this year? Let me know what you tried. If it worked, if it didn't, I'd love to work with you on it.